Okay, there's a couple more people joining us as well. Um, and so first, we are going to have some set questions that we're going to ask. I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we have some questions for them. And then after that, we're going to give you all some time to maybe ask some questions, probably within the last maybe 15 minutes or so. And so we'll go ahead and start the introduction. Let me go ahead and admit this one person in real quick, and then we'll go ahead and start the introduction. Okay, so first we have Dr. Stephanie Carter-Atkins, who is currently the Interim Dean of Residence Life and Housing and Director of Residence Life at Wake Forest University. She has worked professionally since obtaining her master's degree in 2002 from the University of Georgia. The vast majority of her professional career has been in the SEAHO region. It is truly home for her. She just wrapped up an amazing year as SEAHO president and continues to serve in the association as current past president. She has also served as faculty for the Regional Entry Level Institute, the National Housing Training Institute, the Senior Housing Officers Institute, and Student Housing Training Institute in South Africa. She has a passion for the work she does in res life and housing, especially having conversations or presenting on topics like supervision, and legacy, and servant leadership, to name a few. She can also talk your ear off about CrossFit, and her favorite are burpees. So I love that. I don't love burpees, but yeah, that's you're gonna have to help
It's
me with
okay. I don't either. No one should love burpees. That's okay.
it.
Yep.
Oh, goodness. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Carter-Atkins. And next we have Dr. Dee Allard. She is currently the Executive Director for the Department of Housing and Residence Life at Mississippi State University. She's worked in higher education for 27 years in August, and she was raised in the residence life education side of the HRL organization. Welcome, Dee. And next we have Liz Ingrao. She is currently the Associate Director of Staff Recruitment and Training at the University of Miami. She has worked in higher education for 23 years. She's the previous co-chair for 2 years for RELI, previous RELI faculty for the virtual year, previous vice chair for individual outreach and giving for the Akuo I Foundation. She has served as an Akuo I Foundation regional rep and silent auction chair. She is a chair select for the Professional Development Committee for SEAHO, and she's a member of a variety of committees within the SEAHO and Akua I regions. Okay, this one person. So thank you for joining us, Liz. Okay, I lost my mouse, y'all. Sorry. And next we have Kaitlyn O'Keefe. She works at the University of Georgia, and she's Assistant Director for Residential Programs and Services. She's worked in higher education and residence life since 2013. She was at Florida State University from 2013 to 2015 as an assistant coordinator, and at the University of Kentucky from 2015 to 2017 as a resident director. She's also worked at University of Florida from 2017 to 2019 as an area coordinator. She was a RELI participant and in 2017 and an NHTI participant in 2022. And she won 2023 SEAHO Outstanding Mid-Level Professional as well. So welcome, Kaitlyn, as well. So thank you all. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with our questions. And so first, can you talk about your career journey currently? Whoever wants to start.
I guess I'll jump in. Hello, everybody. Again, Dee Allard at Mississippi State. And for my career journey, started out with, I guess I went more the traditional route of housing and residence life. So lived on campus my first year at Florida State University. Yeah, Kaitlyn. Yes, there you go. Did my undergrad and grad work at Florida State and became an RA my second year as a resident, and then just got the bug from there, I guess you can say. So got very involved after the RA experience, a couple of years with RHA, ended up being SEAHO director while I was at Florida State at one point, and then decided I wanted to move out of the region. So did a stint at Glacuho at Ball State University as a residence hall director for my first position, and then missed SEAHO a lot. So I was like, well, I'm going to go back south. So I went back as an area coordinator at Appalachian State University, and then made my way to at Carolina, of course, in Carolina. UNC Chapel Hill. I worked there for 7 years as assistant director in various roles. Made my way to University of North Florida as associate director there in residence life, and now at Mississippi State as executive director. So like I said, very much a traditional role. Started out with the RA position, made my way into student leadership, and just kept going from there. Became very involved with SEAHO once I got back into the region, back in 2000. Yep, I'm showing my age, and has been very involved ever since. And so I know there are other questions, so I will leave it at that, but very traditional. Liz, I think you had your,
Yeah.
there you go.
I'll go next. Hi, everybody. Liz Ingrao again. I had a semi-traditional route, but not really. So I was an RA as well, but I was going to law school when I graduated undergrad, but decided I needed a break from education. So I took 3 years off to be a hall director before I got my master's degree. And that's actually where I caught the bug. I was just like, I need somewhere to live so I can study for my LSATs and all the things. And then caught the bug and my hall director position at SUNY Cortland in upstate New York. And then I got my master's at Syracuse and then came down and found my way into SEAHO after grad school. My fun story, my advisor was dating the assistant director of Res Life at my first job. And that is how I found out about that job, because I had already had a full-time job out of grad school that I was offered at my institution where my grad assistantship was. And I just applied to that one school and got a job. So how I got into SEAHO and into Florida specifically. So worked at Florida International for my first professional position after grad school. Then I went to Florida Gulf Coast University for almost 10 years. I left 1 month shy of my 10-year anniversary. And I know some people might be like, why were you there so long? Because literally no year was the same. We built 5 buildings in 6 years and had staffing changes and reorg changes and all the things. So I got to wear a lot of hats while I was there. And so found myself there almost 10 years and then made my way over here to be associate director first of Res Life here at UM, and then now in my current role as associate director of staff recruitment and training. So I'll leave the rest for the questions later.
I'll jump in. Stephanie again. So I too was an RA back in the day, right? So I did my undergrad at Florida State, so I was an RA there. So I was a student assistant or student advisor. I can't remember what the position was. And then I was an RA my senior year. It was very interesting. My supervisor at the time had gone to grad school and had done a student affairs program, had talked it up. So I looked at the University of Georgia. So that's where I went and got my master's degree from. And I was a grad hall director in Brumby Hall for 2 glorious years. It was good times there. Learned a whole lot. Right out of grad school, I went and worked at Duke University. So as I mentioned, right, I'm a big state school girl. So then I went to Duke private and kind of mid-size. It was like a culture shock, I'll be honest with you, of just kind of walking into, I joke, if you've ever been around me and I talk about my Duke experience, it's like, it's when alcohol and privilege meet, crazy things happen. So it was good times there. Like for as long as I was there, they hired 9 of us in at the same time because they were transitioning from grad hall directors basically to professional staff. They just dumped 9 of us off in there and was like, figure it out. And you know what? We did. A lot of them left. I stuck around for a few years, but whatever. So after Duke, I actually went and did a stint in privatized housing just because I was like, all right, I need to do something different. So I went and worked with an affiliate that was with the University of New Orleans. So I live right across the street from Lake Pontchartrain. This was literally, when I left there, it was in like June, and that's when Katrina came in August of that year, like literally right before. So it was kind of crazy, but I realized privatized housing was not the thing I wanted to do, right? I actually enjoy the work of Res Life, and that was just more business than I wanted to. At the time, I had gotten engaged, and my then fiance at the time had a job that took us to Wisconsin. So that was my first kind of step really out of the region. I'm a Floridian. No, I don't think people live other places other than the South. I get it. I don't quite fully understand. It snowed a lot, y'all. Like it was fine in the summertime when I first went up there, and then it got dark at 5 o'clock. and got like, there was like snow everywhere. And like people were just fine with it. And I didn't fully understand. And I also saw a lot of pregnant. I was like, I get it. It's cold. Y'all are doing, it's a lot of things going on. So I lasted for a few months in Wisconsin and said, this is not the life for me. We ended up getting married up there at the time. He's my ex-husband now, so whatever. We can talk about that story at a later date. We moved to Florida. So then I started working at the University of Florida. Kathy Hobgood hired me there, and then she pieced out and left and went to Clemson like a few months later. I love her to death, but she was like, you got it, thanks. I enjoyed my time at Florida. It was great. As I mentioned, I did my undergrad at Florida State and my grad work at Georgia. So if you're a football person, you see some disconnect that's going on there. But it was great while I worked there. From Florida, I went to the University of South Carolina. Yep, went to the University of South Carolina, and I was an assistant director there for a few years. Love my time in Columbia. It is truly like a second home. Columbia is where I had my son, so that is like truly all those connections there. Left Columbia and went to the University of West Georgia. So that was I'd never heard of Carrollton, Georgia before, but it was great. I was the associate director at the University of West Georgia for a few years, and it was good times. I learned a whole lot. I realized the work that I want to do is truly like the Res Life lens, right? I like that. I said, if there was ever a director of residence life position that opened up, I would try to figure out what that looked like. And lo and behold, a few years after being there, Wake Forest had a director of res life position open up. And I was like, man, I don't often see these. So I just got to shoot my shot and go for it. And I came here in 2017 as a director of residence life. As Christian kind of mentioned, I'm in an interim space right now. And come Monday, I'll be in a different position soon that I get to now. And, you know, all the great things that come along with it. But yeah, so that is my like all over the place kind of connection. I'll give it to Kaitlyn.
And I'll go ahead and wrap it up. As you can see, there's a lot of connections, even just sitting here in this panel, which I just love about SEAHO. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, makes it feel like home. I too, similar to Dee, had a very traditional trajectory through higher ed. The reason I actually considered going into higher ed was actually because of a grad that worked here in Brumby at UGA when I was an undergrad student, Sherelle Finley. So if you know her, she's the one who convinced me to go to grad school and convinced me to go to Florida State. So I owe that to her. I did my area or assistant coordinator work at Florida State for 2 years. I knew that I was not leaving SEAHO. Florida State's kind of like a cult, people consider. They're not wrong. Anyone who has been there knows that about it. But I knew that I didn't want to leave the SEAHO region at that point. And so I took a bit of a tour of the Southeast, went up and worked at the University of Kentucky. I also came in with a big cohort. There were 7 of us my year as a resident director. And we thought we were like the greatest thing since sliced bread. Learned a lot. We called ourselves Fresh and Fierce. And it was a good time. And the funny thing is at this point, I think there might be 3 of us left in the field, but you know what? We found our way. After that, I did 2 years there and then left and also went to the University of Florida, which hurt my heart a little bit. Wasn't sure if that was the right place, but it ended up being that for me. So I did 2.5 years at the University of Florida. And right before the pandemic, I left. I left December of 2019 and came back to my alma mater here at the University of Georgia and have been here ever since. And now serve, like I said, as an assistant director for residential programs and services. And so that's a little bit about my trajectory and where I've been so far.
Well, thank you so much for y'all sharing y'all's experience. We got a lot of wealth of knowledge and experience, and I love that about this panel. So what's one piece of advice would you share with someone about getting involved in SEAHO?
I can start us off. I think one of the things I think about is that I think sometimes people come to SEAHO for the first time and you're like, whoa, what did I just walk into? All these people know each other. I don't understand. And sometimes that can be a little scary. I think my first time as a grad, I was like, what is this thing? But I will say, I think the best thing you can do for yourself is to go to that program, talk to that committee member, go have a conversation, because stepping into that, like, we're all there to make sure that that next generation can also come up behind, because we're not going to be in these roles forever. It can't sit on the shoulders of the people who are sitting in those roles now for all eternity, because they're going to move on and do something great. And so I think my thing is don't double guess yourself. Don't second guess yourself. Like, you have what you need to step into those roles. This year, I'm serving as the chair for the Marketing Organizational Promotions Committee. My first year on the committee was last year. So it's an example of like, you can do a lot of great things in a really short amount of time. There are some committees where it may seem like, oh, I'm never going to get involved, or I'm never going to get to be able to move up, or should I really apply for that or put my name in the hat? The answer is yes, because at the end of the day, if nothing else, you're the one stopping yourself if you don't take that chance or opportunity.
Jumping off what Kaitlyn said, I would say my piece of advice is to start small but dream big. Because I think, yes, if that position is open, chairship, head of whatever, go for it. But if you don't get it, start small. Start with your passions, get on the committee, help to volunteer at a conference, moderate a program, like start getting your foot in the door so people can see you and know who you are, but never stop dreaming big. Like Kaitlyn said, she was just on the committee the year before and now she's the chair. So if you kind of go with that mantra, I think that will help you be successful in getting involved in SEAHO or any other kind of organization that you might be involved or passionate about.
I'll say too, like, I know the SEAHO like newsletter went out today, right? So there was a call for folks who may want to help with nominations or do other things. Like, everything is not going to be like huge and glamorous, right? Like, I think as people mentioned, but find a way to just get your foot in the door and be involved, right? So think about, this might be something easy. Let me shoot my shot and see if I can get on this nominating committee, because one, my own personal plug as past president, I get to be over this process. So help us pick the next leadership for SEAHO, right? This may not be something you ever thought about before, but if this is a way for you to be able to get involved, while it's going to be a small group of people, I would love to see some new fresh faces of people who want to do something differently and kind of get their name put out there. So think about some of these unconventional ways to also get involved in an association, right? There's plenty of opportunity.
And finally, I echo all the things already mentioned to get involved and connected. It's really about you taking that initiative, taking that step. And if you're a little hesitant about that, go with somebody you already know in your network and just have them connect you in some shape or fashion with a person, with an initiative, whatever that case may be. There are lots of opportunity. Just step in. And it doesn't have to be big steps that you have to take. Just do some smaller thing in the committee and go from there. Just reach out.
Okay, thank you. And so, what is one thing you wish someone would have told you about moving up in the field?
Right? It's lonely. It can be lonely at times, right? I mean, at some point you get to where like you may not have any like peers, right? Obviously kind of on your campus to some extent, right? And maybe you've made great connections with your staff, who you supervise, and you're kind of there, right? So how are you going to make connections with other folks? Or how are you going to make sure you feel supported? And what does that look like for you? I don't think we often think about that to some extent. And to me, I think I have felt it the most, like kind of sitting in a seat of leadership when I've had staff members who I like leaned on a whole lot to kind of support. And some of that is because of identity, because they look like me and they just kind of offer that space. And when they have moved on, like, oh, that was kind of a shock to the system. So to me, I think it is just a reminder that, moving up is absolutely right. If you have dreams to do that, great, take those steps to do so. Everybody also doesn't have to, right? Everybody cannot be the president of your university, or everybody can't be the director. And it is okay to be in the role that you're in that you love and be an assistant director or associate director or whatever the case may be. And you may love that and like, don't feel the pressure from everyone else saying, oh my God, you've been here for like 5 years. Don't you want to do something else? If you don't, it's okay. Like, be okay with that and just kind of like knowing what you want to do, feel comfortable with it, and all those kind of things. As long as you are learning and growing and still contributing in a way that is meaningful, do what you need to do.
I think something that I would have liked to hear, and I think that I even get to hear from people as I still have those conversations about moving up, is that there's not a timeline for it. I think so often it's like, I am going to be a grad, I'm going to go be a resident director, then I'm going to move up and I'm going to be an assistant director, and then it's time to move on. And we are all going to move at different paces, and that is okay. And so enjoy the moment you're in when you're in it, because you don't get to go back to be a hall director. You don't get to go back to spend the time and supervise RAs and be an advisor for community councils. Like, those only happen once in our careers typically. And the higher you go up, the further you're removed from the students, which for a lot of us is typically why we got in the work in the first place. And so enjoy the moment when you're in it, because it will fly by and you'll be like, oh yeah, I was, when I was a resident director, when I was a hall director, I remember doing that. And then you're like sitting in 6 meetings a day that you don't want to be sitting in. And you're like, I wish I could go do that. I'll go to your staff meeting. I'll do that for you. And so I think that's something I think about, is that oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this too, we're like, what's my next step? What do I need to be doing? How do I prepare myself? And I think something that I was told and that I like to share to the folks that I supervise and mentor is that, enjoy the moment you're in, because it will be gone before you know it and you'll miss that moment.
I'll jump in here. And for me, a lot of it has to do two thoughts. One, as executive director, realizing that I don't have the opportunity to make as many decisions as people think you do. And a lot of that having to do with getting others on board, the impact it may have with other departments, even within and beyond your organization, or even the institution itself. And so, for example, we have an event that's going to be going on in about 2 weeks. We need to make sure we get the approval from the mayor, because there's going to be some noise impact in her area. And so there are so many levels and layers to that. And so just appreciating the opportunity that you have now of making a lot of decisions is something to keep in mind. And then the other thing that comes to mind is really everything you build as far as your earlier experiences, how you manage your time, what you do to take care of yourself, all of this plays a bigger and bigger role as you move up the ladder. And so that's something to keep in mind, that if you struggle now with time management or taking care of yourself, it's just going to get worse. So you need to figure out how you set that foundation for yourself and protect it, set those boundaries, because others will scoop in to take it if you don't.
I would say find women leaders that you aspire to be. Because I know for me, at the institutions I've chosen to work at, I'm typically not seeing women in the directorship. I think we are very fortunate to have all of us here today. But I think had I gone just by what I had exposure to or what I had seen, I wouldn't have thought that I could be in this role or be in a leadership role. And so first step, you're here, yay, you're seeing people who are in those leadership positions. But I think being able to find that person that maybe isn't at your institution, that is either in a position you want or a position that like you, that you have a peer similar to what others have shared about, as you move up, you have less and less like people next to you to vent to do whatever you need to do with it. And so I would say finding that woman that inspires you and try to make a connection and a mentorship so that you have someone to guide you on that path when you may not see that in your own leadership or your journey thus far.
Christian, can I say something real quick before you go to the next question? I really want to reiterate what Dee said about the decision-making thing, right? I think so many folks, like when you're not necessarily sitting in that seat of making the decision, think, why didn't that person just do it? Like if I was sitting there, I would have just been like, bam, 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 this is what we're going to do. That's just it, end of story. And it's like, man, you don't quite know, right? You don't quite know the authority you have or don't have until you sit in the seat and you realize how many other people are involved in decisions you would hope you could just make on your own. And all the other people, or perhaps when you make a decision, there's someone else who can still say, we're still not going to do that, or whatever the case may be. And I know sometimes, for me, when I was a coordinator, thinking the same thing of my director at the time of like, just make a decision. I don't understand it. And it's like, you don't realize it until you sit in it. And then you sit in this space and it's just like, oh man, I had so much more power and authority when I was over my own res hall and I could do whatever I want to do in my space. And it was amazing. No one was really questioning it. And then you get into this role and you're like, oh, okay, I got to talk to you and you and you, and you may not. Okay, great. Thanks. I just needed to bring that home.
Thank you. Very wonderful advice. I'm definitely taking all that in. So next question will be, what challenges have you faced and or overcome related to your identity?
I'll go first. So I have two that I'll speak about. So one, is my Latina identity and the fact that I'm fluent in Spanish, but when you look at me, I don't look like I am. So while I recognize that that's a privilege, I also recognize that sometimes things happen in my spaces that people don't realize I either understand what they're saying or they don't realize that I'm part of said population that someone might be talking about. And so having to be that voice to say, hold up, like, I know what you're saying. I'm advocating. Let's cut the nonsense out. Um, and so I think with that, it's just owning your space and recognizing that while I have privilege doesn't make it easier. But then also being the token, because I am also not here in Miami, but at other places, I have been the only person that speaks Spanish. So I would get the random call in the middle of the day from the front desk, like, hi, there's a parent that doesn't understand English. Do you have time to talk to them? Well, no, I'm in a meeting, but maybe that's something we should work on so that someone in the central office can speak Spanish. I've had to do that at most of the places I've worked, which is still mind-boggling to me. But then also this other identity is just kind of size inclusion. And it actually happened here, and I've been very vocal about it. I got here and the polo for the department only came up to an extra large. And I'm like, you literally have not just me, but other people in this department that are not that size. So why did we pick this polo? Like, what were we doing? So literally my second week here, I had to go to the bookstore and get polos that kind of look like the rest of the department's polos for the 4 people that did not fit in the polos that we had. And from that point on, I'm now the apparel person in the office, which I'm totally fine doing. But I think that that is also not uncommon that, you know, they don't think about the fits, the sizes. Not every woman fits in a woman's cut and vice versa. And so really just dealing with size inclusivity, size of furniture, spaces, accommodations that people may need that isn't really talked about a lot. So I would say those are kind of the two identities that I've struggled with in my career.
I will speak to two for myself. One having to do with being, I'm fortunate that I'm not the only Black person in my department or institution in leadership roles, which has changed recently, which is fantastic. But as executive director, I'm sitting in more construction and facility roles or meetings that I am often the only female as well as Black person in the space. And so that has been a challenge because I'm very mindful of how people may react or not react to certain things. And so it's more me than getting any impression specifically from the others that are in that space. And so just making sure that I speak up to some of the things Liz even mentioned, that certain things that haven't been thought of are presented in those spaces that perhaps we wouldn't usually talk about. And the other thing having to do with being an introvert, I'm very much an introverted individual that I have to push myself oftentimes to state, hey, these are some of the things to consider with housing or this concept. And so that has been more challenging for me, but it has gotten me out of my shell more readily because I'm more comfortable in my space with my people than I am with the others. But I'm also representing housing and residence life for the division for various projects. And so I need to be mindful of that as well.
When I first stepped into my assistant director role, it was the first time I had a male supervisor for a minute, which is incredibly lucky. That is not a common experience. And so in returning to having a male supervisor, I was the only female on our leadership team when I started in this role. And with that being said, it was provided a bit of a challenge because he would often bring topics to our one-on-ones or things like that where he thought he was there to be supportive and help me develop. But they often came across as, why do you have an opinion? Why can't you just get on board with everyone else? Why are you being so emotional about this? And so it was a conversation of, I'm not being emotional. I'm just sharing an opinion that might be different from the other people sitting around the table. And so that was something not that I didn't expect it, because I'd seen it happen before, I'd experienced it before, but coming directly from my supervisor, I was surprised in that, because they said that they had hired me intentionally for this role because of some of the identities I held, and then they were frustrated or had feedback that were specifically related to that. Why are you showing up in that space in that way? Why are you so loud? Well, because if I'm not loud, you're not going to hear me. You're not going to listen. And I'm going to repeat myself 6 times, and you're still not going to listen until someone else says it who's sitting across the table from me. So that was one of the things that I faced. And I think that it was a good learning lesson, because it is something that I'm very aware of in terms of like how people show up in spaces, and ensuring that regardless of what their identities are, we're not going after them based on that, but because of the information they're sharing or things like that. So I think that's something that was challenging as I stepped into my first AD role.
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of similar, right? I'm always very aware when I'm the only Black woman in a space, which happens, a good bit of times, which, okay, I get it. I'm there to do the part that I need to do, all those things. I think for me, it sometimes becomes very apparent to me in meetings sometimes where I'm quiet, or perhaps feedback has been given to my supervisor that, oh, Stephanie wasn't really speaking up. Maybe she was just doing, if I'm on my computer in a meeting, maybe she just wasn't engaged in this process or whatever the case may be. And to me, that's not it, right? I'm totally not one of those people who just likes to um, keep a conversation going for the sake of keeping it going, right? And I'm in meetings with people all the time who just want to keep talking. I don't fully understand that. Like, if we say what we need to say, let's just move on. Let's do something else. Because I'm like everyone else, right? I mean, who has time to actually get their work done? So sometimes when you're in meetings, you are actually trying to respond to emails or doing other things. And if there's a topic that may not necessarily apply to me, okay, yeah, I'm just not going to contribute to the noise just to do so. So it's been those kind of moments. And sometimes I often wonder, the things I don't know about that I just don't know, right? Or conversations that are happening around me that probably should include me, but maybe they aren't for whatever reason. And you just don't know. But I often am just like, okay, like I want people to make sure that they come talk to me where things involve me, but I just don't know sometimes that just doesn't always happen, I imagine. But that's kind of been my things to get used to.
Wow, thank y'all for sharing. I think that's very, all those experiences, I'm like, yes, yes. So I'm sure others can relate. So what are some ways you practice self-care as you moved up in your career?
Set boundaries, whatever that means for you. I'll give you an example. I had both of my children while living on campus. My boundary was I needed to be home for bedtime. I will go before, I will go after, I'll come back. I need 25 minutes to read a book and put my kids to bed. And then I'm yours for the rest of the evening to whatever time. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do that as I've moved up. Is I've had supervisors that have acknowledged and recognized that boundary. But for me, that was, to me, very small. If you've got me all day, give me 25 minutes to go home. And then just if it's not with children, just whatever those boundaries are for you so that you can refresh and re-energize, because you're no good to anybody else if you yourself are not recharged. So whatever that means for you, the earlier you can identify that and start setting that putting that into practice, I think the easier it will be as you move up.
Jump in. I'm similar to Liz in that aspect. I've appreciated that we at Wake have been able to take kind of a, since the pandemic, or really since the last couple of years, been able to look at like flex work and what that looks like, and been able to kind of figure out a plan that works individually for staff members, like in consultation with their supervisor and like approved. So to me, that allows me to start my day remote or from home, and then come into the office, and then leave in enough time to go pick up my son from school, get home, and get to the gym, because I work out at 5:30 p.m. So I try to be there, or if he's got soccer, which we're in the season of soccer right now, soccer practice is usually 5:45. So I need to have enough time to get him, get back home, get out to practice. So I've appreciated that there has been some flexibility that has been afforded to us as staff, that allows me to be able to do that and take care of the things that are, the job is important, but my health and my kid and all those other things are just as important to me. And I want to make sure that there's time to do it. And if I decide to get back on in the evening and check email or do stuff, because once again, I've had a bunch of meetings all day and haven't been able to do so, then that is still me deciding to do that when I want to or not, because guess what? The next day is going to come and we're still going to be back in the office answering those emails. So I get to kind of pick and choose, but I appreciate the flexibility. That has been amazing for my own personal self-care. And I talk about it when we're interviewing folks. Come on, we can do these things here. Like you can live your life, you can do this work, all these things can happen together.
So I am a single woman. Am not married, don't have kids. And so I don't have that, that additional motivator to set those boundaries. And so I've got to be very intentional about what that looks like. Because oftentimes it's like I do have like my leadership team, two are, one has two small children, another has a wife and child. And so some things we have to ebb and flow with. And so what I've had to do is put certain things into priority. And so I prioritize what that looks like for you. And so like Stephanie, once upon a time I was doing CrossFit. I still don't anymore. Anyway, that's another story. But the gym, some sort of workout, physical activity is really critical for me. And I need to get that done. And so I put it in as something of a sacred appointment, essentially. And so between that, I'm also a learner at heart. And so I need to do certain things to take care of self, and I have to prioritize that and make it a thing. And so I put it in my schedule, and as though this cannot be moved and must be taken care of. So that is one way that I do it. And others, yeah, you just got to make sure you prioritize whatever that looks like for you.
I think for me, it was coming to the realization that the to-do list will never be fully done. Like it will always be there. So attempting to accomplish that in a day, in a week is not realistic. Don't try to make yourself do that, because if you do, you will never stop working. You will sit in front of your computer when you go home, when you come back, whatever it looks like. And so one of the things that I know that I've also had to be really intentional with is that finding that community outside of work. Who is the community you have beyond the buildings that we work in, for our staff who live on the buildings that you live in? That is such a challenge, I think, for our field, particularly for those of us who have lived on campus, who currently live on campus. That is really hard. How do you find that space and community? Is that you're finding it in a gym? Is it that you're finding it in a church community? Is it that you're finding it in friends who have pets? Whatever that looks like for you, finding that space beyond the just 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 that we all traditionally, quote unquote, work. And how do you make sure that you're still creating that time and putting it on your calendar, that kind of thing? For me, I know that if I don't meal prep on the weekends, I come home at 5 o'clock and don't want to cook. And so then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go out to eat. And then I'm spending money I don't need to. And then I'm, eating crap that I don't need to. So for me, one of the things that I do for myself is that on the weekends, I will meal prep. And I'll meal prep everything I would want for that week. So that way I'm not coming home and having to ask myself the dreaded question, what am I eating for dinner this week? And so that's something that I've done to help with self-care.
Thank you for sharing. And, that question was asked because it's so important. And I think, as women in higher education, it's just sometimes, hard to navigate because you're also probably trying to prove yourself at work nonstop, right? And I think that's the biggest thing about, identities that we have, and that sometimes we feel like we have to go above and beyond and sacrifice our own self-care for that. So I really appreciate you all showing that as your senior leaders in housing, so others can see that hopefully as well. And so let's see. So some of you have kind of touched on this a little bit, but what is one piece of advice you would give on how to move up, especially when most of the leaders at the top are men? Like that you want to move up, but they are all men at the top, and yeah. What advice?
I guess I'll say if you want it, go for it, right? Like I honestly, I have had to get a whole lot better at myself of saying, like, don't say no to yourself, right? If there's a position that you want or something else, and you meet, and you maybe you don't even meet all the qualifications, but most of them, and you are interested in doing the work and everything else, then shoot your shot. go ahead and do it, try to get the position, see what comes from it, but don't count yourself out just because maybe the folks up there don't look like you or whatever the case may be. I mean, I think we often say no to ourselves so much, or as we've seen things, right? Most women will make sure you check off all the boxes or all the things you need for this job before you even submit it. Like, just do it, right? At this point, the experience you would get hopefully from interviewing and everything else, and if it works out, then amazing, you got it. If not, you've learned something hopefully from this thing, but just don't be in your own way when it comes to it, right? Just do what you got to do and see what happens with it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Like, you can't walk through doors you've already closed. So the biggest thing is, don't you close the door, let somebody else close it for you. And it's not ever because you didn't try walking through the door. And just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean you too can't have it. So you will find your place as you move up. You'll know where you need to be and where you can't be for whatever reason. Life circumstances happen. So sometimes the door gets closed because you just can't move because you're bound by something. But yeah, walk through the doors, man.
I think that one of the things that I would say is that just because it doesn't happen once doesn't mean it's not going to ever happen. So also, if you attempt and it doesn't work out that first time, know that that's okay too. And it doesn't mean that you're not qualified or you're not going to be great. Maybe that just wasn't the right place, the right fit, the right time. And so I think that's something that as you move up in your career, you're going to see your friends and your peers and other people move up at different times in different situations. And just because you're not at that place doesn't mean that it's not going to come and find you when it's the right thing. So I think that's also something to think about.
And finally, I would say just be you. Don't try to be anything other than who you are. There's a reason why you have been successful to this point. And so just continue to bring that to the table. People will see that quality, those values, and just bring your talents where they usually where you're usually at. So please do that.
Okay, well, thank you. I am going to open it up to the audience for questions. Also, I do have an evaluation. That's a quick evaluation that if you all please complete, I'm going to put it in the chat. Um, and so if you can just fill that out before you depart. But of course, I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. So you can either put it in the chat or you can shout it out, or hopefully we don't have a run-in with the train or something.
I'll ask a question. Hi, I'm Christy. I work at Lynn University as an Associate Director of Housing and Residence Life. I'm more focused in operations. However, I'm still have my hands in res life and roommate issues and whatever else they tell me to do, depending on the day. Something I struggle with, I feel like as a woman, and I feel like many women navigate this, especially as we move up in leadership, I'm very direct. It's just who I am as a human being. It's who, and it comes, and sometimes I think because of that and being a woman, it comes off as like I'm rude or I'm angry all the time. And I'm like, if a male said the same thing I'm saying, that wouldn't be questioned. And I've been told before that's going to be a struggle for you as you move up. And I'm like, but I've been treated even worse by male leadership and they got there, right? And so how to balance that? Because I don't want to change who I am necessarily. I think I can work on my tone. Everyone can have like that ability, but I think there's value in directness and I think there's value in being forward. So navigating that.
So my little kind of tidbit piece, right? I mean, I think sometimes one, I hate that people kind of say, "Hey, yeah, right, you're not gonna like do too much or go too far because of being direct." I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, right? I think more people should be ready to directly answer questions and not kind of beat around the bush. And I think we have a society where it doesn't feel good to people. I think to me, I think sometimes, I mean, this is not the rush and like, hey, leave your job, but to some extent, I always want to be someplace where I feel appreciated and where people understand who I am and what that brings to the table. Because I can only imagine after so many times of someone saying it or anything else, like you are just carrying a lot of weight that people are dumping on you and the things that are going, and it just kind of gets tiring after like so long of a period of time. And to me, I mean, obviously that talks about the culture of the institution and where you are and what that looks like. And you have to, we all have to ask ourselves, right? If there are things that are going on in our workplace that don't quite mesh with who we are, like how long do you want to put yourself in a situation where you deal with it? Now, if you say, listen, it's frustrating and I can do it, okay, all right, forge ahead if that's it. But if at some point you're just like, I just can't, and I don't see things changing and people just don't truly appreciate, I mean, I'm not trying to cause any harm, but if I have a question or if that's just who I am, like, I don't necessarily want to bend or break all the time just because someone can't answer a question or just feels weird about it. So I think you have to ask yourself how long you want to be in situations in which you don't feel like you can show up in a way that, once again, is I'm not trying to cause any harm, but that's just how I communicate, or this is just what it is. Like, I just want to make sure I'm appreciated here. That's all. Not a real answer, but just my thoughts.
Any other questions?
Sorry, so I have a quick question. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. How do you, or any advice on how to maneuver around feedback that is given around you, not to you?
Can I ask, was it from a supervisor or was it just from like who'd the feedback come from?
Just yes.
Do you know where the feedback originated from?
Sometimes. So I think the deeper part of the question is there. So I love feedback. Like that's how I live. That to me, that shows that you care about me as a professional. But there are times where I also prefer the feedback to come directly of where the feedback is, the source of it is. So I do understand there are times where, like for supervisors, it's best for my supervisor to share that. But just any advice, or there are times when that doesn't come directly from your supervisor, but when opportunities that could have came directly to you for whatever reason, it just goes in a different roundabout way. Just any advice on how to kind of maneuver and follow back up with individuals, or just any advice on that part?
I wonder if part of that is, so if someone has given it to your supervisor and your supervisor has given it to you, like for me, in that one-on-one with my supervisor, I'd say, you know what, I do appreciate you sharing this, right? So because feedback is a gift. I have that posted on my computer. And Janae, you said I mean, we all, right? I can't be better if someone's not telling me what's going on. But I think in that moment, I would also want to talk to my supervisor and say, I appreciate you bringing this to me. I hope that whoever brought it to you, that maybe you could have a conversation with them or find out why they don't feel comfortable talking directly to me. I don't necessarily want my supervisor always knowing if there's something going on that a colleague could come directly to me or whatever the situation may be. Like, in my case, he doesn't need to be involved if we could have this conversation, right? Give me a chance to figure it out. Like, if I don't, then okay, great. Now we've escalated things. I had a conversation with Stephanie. She sucks. She didn't take this feedback. Still got a concern. Now you've escalated this. But I think from that lens, and the seat I sit as a supervisor too, I'd want to tell people, like, all right, so tell me what's making you not want to talk to Janae. Like, did you have a conversation with her before at some point and she just didn't receive it, or she kicks you out the office? Like, what happened that got you to a place where you just don't want to talk to her? Because let's address this more than anything else. Because I want to build a culture in our office where people feel like they can actually go, I just need to pop in your office, or can I call you? Can I do something? And I'm talking to you, not always going up, down, or around, because that doesn't help you as a professional learner. Because you may have questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to add to that, I was going to say, if the supervisor themselves don't think they should be asking that question, maybe you can then say, I would appreciate it if you get this feedback in the future, encourage the person to talk to me directly instead of going through you, because I have follow-up questions, or maybe there was not an example of said feedback given and you want examples, or, to help, because how are you going to get better if you don't know what you did wrong? And then, going to what Stephanie said, like, what happened that this person doesn't feel comfortable? Is there a deeper issue there that can even validate the feedback? Maybe the feedback isn't legit, but they have a problem with you and they're using it through this lens. So sometimes that happens too. So I think just asking good questions and figuring out with your supervisor how they can help you navigate that as well as this may or may not continue.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Denise Golden had a follow-up question.
Yes, excuse me. I meal prepped as well, so I was just trying to eat lunch. So going back to tone, I'm going to admit that I might not be succinct. So I have a little bit of context to provide, and then maybe that will help us all answer the question for each other. So in supervising, folks who come to you as a supervisor and say, how can I make sure that I'm being genuine while I acknowledge that I need to change delivery for certain audiences in order for my message to be received well? So we can all think of examples of how we may change our tone when we're talking to a group of students compared to when we're talking to the Board of Trustees in a presentation. And I feel I'm reflecting back on my time as a supervisor and giving people advice, and even thinking of my role as a mother to children, and I'm trying to teach to become good communicators, and saying, hey, you should be thinking about time and place, read the room. What should you be including in your statements and your, presentation of what you want to talk about in order to get the most out of the conversation, not necessarily to win or to get your end goal. I mean, that's human nature, is to want that as well. But, as I'm thinking through all of these roles where I am advising people to not necessarily watch your tone or tone down your tone, but definitely be assertive. I think, who was talking about that? Christy, how do you teach or, advise, not teach, give advice when someone comes to you and says, I've been given this feedback, but you also do acknowledge that we change our tone all the time, right? And delivery of our messages to make sure that they're received, but how do you stay genuine too? So while I struggled as a supervisor to make sure I was giving authentic advice for that topic, I certainly, not necessarily struggled, always wanted to know if I was giving the best advice. So open the floor. I would love to hear, or maybe somebody else on the call would love to hear some more about that too. So I'm going to mute and eat my prepped lunch. I said I gave a lot of context. Hopefully people are processing.
I think the thing I think about is kind of what you said in your answer to, or in your question to, in context, is that, it's thinking about time and space and audience. And so, like you said, the way that you're going to approach a group of students is going to look very different if you're going to sit in front of the folks that you supervise versus your supervisor versus the Board of Trustees. And I think for me, that comes back to some of the feedback that I got from my first male supervisor is, okay, so you're coming off really harsh here in this meeting. And so then it was, well, I'm not going to come in and talk with this high pitched voice, and I'm not going to be this little dainty person. That's not who I am. I'm going to come in, I'm going to show up, I'm going to be myself. But I think part of it goes back to what Stephanie was saying about you have at some point in time, it's also being appreciated by the folks who appreciate what you bring to a team at some point in time. And so while not all of us are in a place to just get up and move and leave a job and that kind of thing, I think it's also surrounding yourself with the folks in your department and in your role that do support you and do see what you bring to a team, and making sure that they're in your corner when you do have to have those conversations. And I think it's also dependent upon where the feedback is coming from. I think that's huge. Is it coming from your supervisor who's having this conversation with you? Is it coming from, like Janae said, some random person who has an opinion about something because you showed up in a meeting a certain way? Is it coming from, a student who is frustrated because you told them something they didn't want to hear? Because sometimes we do have to give context to the conversation. And the way we have to be direct about it, the way that we have to give an answer about it isn't always going to please the folks that we have to share that information with. And not being direct about it isn't going to change the end purpose of the meeting. You're not going to be any happier if I come in and I'm doing this whole, singing song and dance. It's still the same answer. So if I song and dance it, does it really change the end result? Like Christy said, of I still have to tell you this. I still have to give you this information. So why am I going to dance around it? And isn't that just wasting your time? And so I think sometimes, I know it was a roundabout answer, but I think it is dependent upon time, place, and manner. I think that's something that we all have to learn as professionals, because I do think that's something that is challenging, especially for new professionals and grads in their roles, and it's figuring that out. But also, at the end of the day, what is the message that you have to get across? And is it going to change the message if you have to do a song and dance for it?
Can I just say something too? As I saw Callie put something in the chat about the, maybe your peer is not thinking it's their job to correct you, right? I definitely think feedback always, as we know, right, always feels like it has this negative connotation, right? And sometimes it is, whatever. Feedback, we also know, is about relationship, right? So if you aren't quite in relationship with folks in a way, then it will feel weird telling your coworker, oh my gosh, maybe you just didn't do that the way you should have done it, or something has changed, whatever the case may be, because the relationship may be off. I always look through things like this through my own lens, right? And my default has never been to let me run to my shared supervisor about someone else that they're not doing. So that's always a place I have to come to and just check it, because everybody doesn't always think that way. And I get it, right? It may be weird to confront someone, but I think all of it is the people we work with, when are we having some of these real conversations about how feedback needs to be shared in our office or amongst ourselves as peers? What is that going to look like for me to have to come to you if I do see you doing something that is not okay? Do I need to just come hopefully in private or whatever it looks like, because we've actually had the conversation. And I think sometimes we just don't have those conversations. I think supervision as a whole in our field is a weird thing, right? Because no one teaches us how to be supervisors, or we don't go to school. There's not really a course for that. We get in these roles where we are supervising folks and we're hoping for the best, that we just don't mess them up. And sometimes we do, because we don't know what we're doing and we don't know how to talk to people or give feedback or just make sure we're open to receiving it. So to me, just look at the relationships that we have with folks. And if you can say right now, yeah, I absolutely would feel weird walking down the hall to tell someone something, then I'm going to ask myself, why is that? What do I need to do to this relationship to get us in a place where the one day that I need to give that feedback, that I can do so and feel comfortable in doing so? And maybe that is, we just need to spend some more time together, or I just need to have some informal conversations, whatever it is. I got to check. It's got to start with me, right? To kind of check that, to be in that comfortable position. And once again, if the office culture is always a run to the supervisor, maybe that just is what it is. That just always feels weird to me.
And I'll just say with that too, there are just some people who can't deal with direct people. And at that point, that's a them problem, not a you problem. But as long as what you're saying is appropriate, genuine, and the truth, then how they receive that, sometimes you really just can't help, because whether you change your tone or not, they are probably still going to react the same way, because sometimes it's about what you said, not necessarily how you said it, and they just weren't ready to hear it. So I think there's that piece too, which is why I think we always stay genuine and true to you are, because if you're equal opportunity director, then it doesn't matter, because you're not treating one person any differently than someone else. And so at that point, they just got to figure it out too. So don't change who you are because someone can't handle it.
Yeah, and ask them, when can I give you some feedback? Just like Liz said, right? You may not be in that moment. You may not be busting down the hallway. Ask when they're ready to receive it so they can be in a good headspace and actually receive it. That'll be fine.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. This has been such a great panel. Thank you all for taking time to share your experiences. I put the evaluation back in there. Also, Denise Golden put in there that Walter Snipes Davidson is actually working on his doctorate project for supervision. So that should be a great resource for us as well. So thank you for sharing that. But once again, I am honored and definitely thankful. I've learned so much today that will be helpful for myself and hopefully for others on this lovely webinar as well. And so we have it recorded, and that way hopefully we'll get it uploaded on the website potentially. So that way you also can go back to it if you need to as well. So thank you all once again for attending, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week. And if you're off tomorrow, happy Friday for you today. So